Hello, and thank you for tuning into the Art of SBA Lending. Today on the podcast, we have Victor Diaz. He's a managing partner at Starfield Smith, which is a SBA law firm that you may have heard of if you've been in the SBA space for more than 5 minutes. Victor is SBA counsel down here in Florida. He's been practicing law for 35 years, and I think it's safe to say he's learned a couple things along the way. I know Victor through our time serving on the Flagle board. He was the chairman of the board. I guess I served under his leadership, and he was a great leader. And I've come to find out Victor has been the head of many organizations in that, president role. It's just a position he feels comfortable in. And I thought that was really interesting. He has a natural tendency to lead, and that goes way back. And I thought I was going to learn a lot about closing SBA loans on this podcast since he's closed thousands and thousands of them. But I also took away some nice golden nuggets on leadership and public speaking. Also, cool story on how Victor helped bring Banco Popular to Florida while he was president of a chamber, of course. And they went on to become a really big SBA lender in the space. So this episode is jam-packed. So without further ado, let's get into it. It's no secret that most entrepreneurs are busy, and getting them to focus on their underwriting checklist is a full-time job. So when it comes to the business plan, projections, and assumptions, I'm a huge proponent of bringing in an expert. Rapid Business Plans is a trusted partner to small business lenders and their borrowers. They make it easy for entrepreneurs to tell their story in a format bankers love. Their team goes the extra mile to ensure everything is done fast and done right. And they're all based here in the US with employees across 4 different time zones. They just completed an export business plan for one of my borrowers, and they were super happy. We got their CRE expansion loan approved, and now they can move forward in their business with a clear plan. Rapid also offers feasibility studies, which I highly recommend for any independent startup loan. So go to rapidbusinessplans.com for more information and set up your Get Acquainted call today. I'll leave a link in the show notes below.
Oh boy, how do I start this one? Victor, thank you so much for joining us on the pod.
My pleasure.
We've known each other now for, what's it been, 10 years? You probably know people around here a lot longer than that, I would assume, being an SBA.
I've probably been working with people that were born about the time that you were born.
Wait, that you were working with them since the time I was born?
Correct.
Which was 89, which you're probably right. So we're
I became a lawyer in 1989, so I've been practicing law since 1989.
Well, that's a big year for multiple reasons then. Well, again, thank you. I know you're with Starfield Smith, and we shared some time in the Flagle board together, and we've even done some deals together. And now I'm here trying to get your origin story. So where do you want to start?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. When you asked me, I immediately said yes. Just because I consider you a friend, and I wanted to help out in any way that I could. And if my story is interesting in any way to what you're doing, I am happy to contribute.
So in other words, you have no idea what you just got yourself into.
I have absolutely no idea what we are about to embark upon.
Do you know where this is going?
I do not know.
I love it. But first, let me just get some basic intro stuff, because I know you're with Starfield Smith, which is an up-and-coming law firm in the SBA industry.
Yeah, we're just getting started, but I think there's a bright future for us.
Now, when did you join them, and did you start there, or did you merge your practice into theirs?
I started practicing 35 years ago, and I started with a big firm. Then I went out on my own, and then eventually I found my way to the SBA world, and practiced in that realm several years on my own. And I was approached by Starfield to be part of their firm. And I thought that it was a great opportunity for me, being a solo practitioner. And it was a privilege because, as you said, they are up and coming law firm. And I thought that it would be a great opportunity for both. They needed somebody in Florida. I was in Florida, and I needed somebody like them to help me grow my practice.
So when was that? 2000?
That was in 2011.
2011. Okay. And when you say you found your way into SBA, how do you find your way into SBA?
Well, that is a kind of a long story. I'll try to make it brief. I don't know. Lawyers don't like to make things brief because we charge by the hour.
I was going to not make any lawyer jokes.
Well, sorry.
You just made two.
Okay,
but,
well.
Go ahead.
So I was back in 1996. You were a toddler. I was the chairman of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce of Central Florida, and we went on a trade mission to Puerto Rico. And during that trade mission, I met Richard Carrion, who is the president and CEO of Banco Popular. In talking to him, he said, Victor, I have a great interest in opening, branches of Banco Popular in Florida. And I said, well, I'm here to help you in any way that I can. Have all the resources of the chamber to help you, and just let me know what I can do. And I thought I would never hear from him. That very same day, I was at the airport and the phone rings, and it's this young lady, secretary. She says, I am Mr. Carrion's secretary, and he is on the line for you. And I said, okay. And so he says, Victor, this is Richard. Okay. Listen, I want to take you up on your offer. We want to go to Florida, and I want you to help me. So I started corresponding and talking weekly with Richard Carrion and all the people from Banco Popular. Eventually, long story short, they did come to Florida. I was able to make the announcement at one of the chamber functions, and it was a great event. Everybody in the banking industry in Florida, Central Florida for sure, was at that luncheon. And so I became their lawyer in Florida. So I helped with the acquisitions of all the locations, negotiating all the leases, and I sort of became their counsel. A good friend of mine who was running the bank, Mercy McCall, called me one time and said, do you know anything about SBA? Because we have an SBA loan that we need to close. And I said, I don't now, but I will by the time you need to close it. So that's how it started. And I closed my first SBA loan in 1997. At that time, I called a gentleman by the name of Paul Arrington, who was district counsel in the Northern District of Florida office. And I went to Jacksonville. I met with him, and he at that time had sort of a little bit of a training opportunity for folks that were interested, and that's how I got started. So I started learning about SBA, and that's led me to where I am now.
You kept going with it. You figured it out. Isn't it amazing? Like, you don't know what you don't know, and you're like, yeah, I can figure this out, and like here we are so many years later.
Well, that is probably one of the scariest things. What you don't know that you don't know. And I obviously did not know what I was getting myself into. I remember this other attorney from another SBA district counsel. His name is Ernie Rosado. And he said, you got to read the CFR. And I'm like, oh, okay. I had no idea what he was talking about. But in any event, I was fortunate enough to find a home in this industry. I started closing loans for Banco Popular. At one time, I was the only lawyer closing loans for Banco Popular. I mean, I had a pipeline of, 30, 40 loans constantly that I was closing all over Florida. At that time, it was just Florida, the footprint. So that's...
What happened with Banco Popular? I feel like a lot of people in our Florida SBA world reference it a lot, but I don't really know them. Were they a big SBA lender at one point?
They were a big SBA lender, huge national presence. It was Popular Inc. They were headquartered, at least the SBA division, out of Chicago. I don't know the details of why they wound down the SBA division, but it was substantial. I mean,
it got really big and then they wound it down.
They got really, really big. And in fact, that's how I met some of my partners. That's where I met David Starfield, because he was also counsel for Banco, and a bunch of other people. And you know how this industry is because you've been in it. But once you're in it, it's really hard to get out. And then people move, and you're with this bank today and with another one tomorrow. And I was fortunate enough to develop some personal friendships with people. I'm a loyal person, and I expect loyalty. I respect loyalty. So I still have some of those people that I closed loans for back in the late 90s, early 2000s that are still reach out to me and say, can you help me close this deal?
You know, you're such a likable person, and you have a good sense of humor. Were you like a jokester in high school, or
No, actually, I was a recluse.
really?
Yeah, I'm still kind of a recluse.
Well, how do you reconcile that? Because you're like the life of the party.
I work with people that still don't know that I can do public speaking, because I shy away from it. But I'm very comfortable with a microphone. I'd rather talk to 1,000 people than to one person.
Well, you're in the 0.1% in the world, I believe, because isn't public speaking the greatest fear of all people?
I find great comfort in doing it.
Well, it couldn't have been like that the first time you did it.
Well, listen, the training as a lawyer, and I was a trial lawyer for 5 years before I started doing transactional work. You have to sort of learn those skills, to think on your feet, be quick, be able to communicate. I've always been, I speak Spanish, I speak French, I speak English sometimes. Most of the time, I butcher it often, but the ability to communicate is indispensable. I was fortunate before I became a lawyer, I worked for public servants, members of Congress, and it was a different world back then, in my opinion, as I was young and sort of going to college, and I had a great opportunity to work. I have a master's from Georgetown University, so I was able to live, work, and go to school in Washington, D.C. And I fell in love with the concept of understanding things. Back then, in order for you to succeed in Washington, you needed to understand, and that led me to go to law school. And so the opportunity to speak comes about frequently when you're a lawyer, right? Because you're called upon to. I mean, unfortunately, most of what I do today doesn't involve any type of convincing or negotiating. I mean, mostly, I'm unfortunately, our practice has sort of come down to just being a scrivener, and the lawyering part has sort of been removed from it, which is kind of unfortunate. But when I started practicing law 35 years ago, you had to be resourceful. You had to be able to communicate. You had to be able to persuade. So I was fortunate enough back in that young age to work with a firm, and they encouraged me. They said, Victor, you need to join citizen boards. You need to join volunteer organizations, and you need to hone in and hone, not hone in, but hone your leadership skills and your communication skills and your persuasion skills. And I did that. So I am very fortunate that I can do that. But if I walk into a room and there's 100 people, I'll be the one in the corner.
Isn't that odd?
I find it very comforting. So what that has led to a kind of an interesting situation, which is that every organization that I join,
you become president.
I become president because that is the only comfortable role that I have.
Well, it's funny. I put out these sales tips every Monday to my, the BDOs all across the country that sign up for it, called Sales Ammo. Go to subscribe. And one of them was, I put, don't join an organization unless you can become the president, essentially. Not that you have to become the president, but essentially meaning like you've got to kind of put your all into it. But in my head, I'm kind of like you, like, I like to get involved. And that's both of us, having chaired Flagel, we both share that.
Yeah.
Now,
and you have to be, everybody gets butterflies. Everybody gets, a little scared whenever they have to get up on that stage. But I find that it is easier for me to lead than to follow.
Mm-hmm. When did you realize that? Early on, or?
We all have to be grateful for the things that our teachers do for us when we're very young. When I graduated from 6th grade, I did not graduate with the highest grade, and I did not get an honors medal. This back in Puerto Rico, I did not get my little medal, but my teacher did give me one award, and she gave me the leadership award.
Wow!
And that was in 1972 when I graduated from 6th grade, and I still have it. And I think that teacher saw something in me, maybe that lack of fear, that ability to sort of be in the front.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't come without fear, but it comes with a belief that you can do it. I watched the other day a documentary on Alexander the Great and how he, being from Macedonia, a very, very small Greek state, conquered the entire Persian Empire, which was multiples and multiples. And I don't know if you've seen it.
Mm-hmm.
It is kind of a documentary kind of movie,
Mm-hmm.
but in that, in the one of the reasons why it is attributed that he was so great in what he did, and I am no Alexander the Great by any stretch of the imagination, but his mother made him believe that he was the son of a god and that he was invincible. And with that knowledge that he thought himself invincible, he defeated many armies by doing things that were incredulously stupid or not doable, but he did them. So I'm not suggesting that I have any necessary parallel to his story, but because I would be Alexander the Little One. I don't know, or the not so
You'd be
great.
Victor the Great.
Victor the Great. Well, having the name of a king does help, but that belief that you can do it,
That's powerful.
it's powerful if you believe it.
It's like when I read a book called Think and Grow Rich, like early on, like when I was 21 or 22. And it's like, oh, all you have to do is, like you can do anything essentially. It like unlocked my brain to think, you can do anything, and you can. I do feel like anyone could do anything, and it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's just a lot up here can control a lot.
Guys, the reviews are in. SBA lenders are calling Corpsmart the best due diligence firm in the industry. Corpsmart is a one-stop shop for all your due diligence needs. And in SBA lending, there's a lot. Searches, filings, vehicles, you name it. I remember I brought a deal in one time that involved an airplane. My credit guy said, "How are we going to go about perfecting a lien on an airplane?" I said, "I don't know. Call Corpsmart." They have decades of experience and they're all about service, and I could speak firsthand on that. If you're not already outsourcing your due diligence, one, you're probably wasting a lot of precious hours that you could be using to make more loans, and two, you could make a mistake, especially if you're lending across state lines because every state is different. If you're looking to streamline this year and get more efficient, this is an easy layup. They can even plug into your LOS so that you can order your searches with a click of a button, and then they're going to end up right where you need them to. To discuss your due diligence needs, go to the Corpsmart website at corp-smart.com, and you can let them know I sent you.
You grew up in Puerto Rico?
Yes.
And for how long?
Until I was 16 years old.
What was that like?
Being 16 or
growing up in Puerto Rico?
I never felt at home in Puerto Rico for some reason. I always wanted to be.
But you were born there.
I was born and raised, and went to public school, and but I always had the desire. Puerto Rico is very insular, right? And of course it's an island, so obviously that goes without saying that it's insular. But I did not like the confinement that it presented. So I always was very much of the mind that I needed to come to the United States and make my life here. Strange as that may sound, I don't know, but I was able to convince my parents my senior year of high school that if we moved to Florida a year before I went to college, that I would be able to get in-state tuition. And so my parents were able to do that and sort of retire to Florida with me. I'm an only child.
That was your plan. You're like, we can save money if we just move to the United States.
Literally.
As a 16-year-old.
Yes.
That's crazy, man. And were your friends like moving to the United States?
No.
Or it was just your idea?
So I have this weird set of facts. I don't belong anywhere. Like, I don't belong with my graduating class from Winter Park High School because I was only there a year. And I don't belong with my graduating class from the people that I went to school from first grade because I was not in the graduating class. So I don't go to either celebration because I don't feel that I fit in either of them. But move on.
You're not missing out. I didn't go to mine either.
So
I want to get back to what you said, because you were a trial attorney for 5 years, and that kind of gave you the foundation for public speaking, bringing it back to the public speaking. But that first time you're in the courtroom making those arguments, was that a little nerve-wracking for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I can tell you, we can sit here I know that we have limited time, but I can tell you, I can sit here. First of all, this is Florida 1989. This is not Florida 2024. When we moved to Orlando, there was only one Diaz in the white pages. I'm sure you don't even know what white pages are or were, but there was only one Diaz, and it was my dad.
That's crazy.
So that's not now, right? But that's what it was. So you can imagine that when I went to the courtroom for the first time, I faced enormous. I didn't feel discriminated against, but I felt that I was not on a level playing field with the guy that was sitting across the table from me.
Mm-hmm.
And that became evident to me very early on. I remember my first hearing. A judge has hearings sometimes in chambers, which his office is, as opposed to in the courtroom.
Yep, I've seen this on TV.
You've seen those. So you go to chambers, and usually it's like a T shape. The judge sits behind the big desk, and then there's a table that comes out, and then the opposing counsel are facing each other. And I'm there for my first sort of motion, and the attorney sitting across the table from me, and the judge start talking about fishing and how many fish they had caught because they had fished together the weekend prior. And I'm like, I am never going to win this motion. And that was true. I didn't win.
Wow.
But yeah, so I had many opportunities like that. Fortunately for me, I found a great opportunity in a very, very reputable firm of the highest caliber, and they mentored me. They gave me the opportunity to develop my skill. That doesn't happen very often. These gentlemen were they didn't think less of me because I was Puerto Rican. If anything, they thought more of me. So that felt great. So yeah, after you win a few of those, you lose some. You will lose some. In fact, that's why I gave up trial practice, because I don't like losing. I don't like losing when I have the facts right. And there's so much that goes into a trial that has nothing to do with the facts or the law, and I didn't like that. So I now practice SBA, which.
All right. Well, back
where I started.
Let me see here. Let me check my notes. I have a question for you. So since you've closed hundreds, if not thousands, probably over 1,000 SBA loans in your career, is it now easy every time you close a loan?
Nope. Let me correct you with the numbers. I closed more than 1,000 loans for Banco Popular alone. And I don't want to tell you how many after that. They're all difficult. None are easy because I approach them as a lawyer. I am not there to transcribe. I am not there to prepare a set of documents. I understand what's going on. People forget that this is the practice of law. We are providing a legal service. We're not providing secretarial or transcription services. I'm not filling out a form. I have to put thought into it. I am your counsel. I don't want to hear, and this is something that I learned early on when I started working with Banco Popular. I had such respect for Richard Carrion that I never wanted a call from Richard Carrion saying to me, "What did you do?" So I don't like to make mistakes. Are they avoidable? No, we all make mistakes. I try to minimize them, but we make them. But it is not for lack of trying. It may be, their interpretations, and sometimes the interpretation is was not the right interpretation, or it was subject to multiple interpretations, and I picked one that probably wasn't the one that agreed with somebody else. But I always start with the end in mind. When I close a loan, I want to see where can this, if this loan goes bad, where is it and how can I prevent that from happening?
Like, having been in SBA over this long period, can you look at, I'm sure there was multiple points of evolution, but do you ever look back on that, horizon and say, like, this is the point where it kind of started going down this path? Because it has gotten to a point where, this is a business, this is an industry, people are chasing volume, units, closings, etc.
I couldn't tell you of a particular point in time, but I can agree with you that it's become sort of, I'll use these words. We have become lawyers. We have become vendors. I don't like to think of myself as a vendor. Regrettably, a lot of clients look at me as a vendor. I am your counselor. I am here to guide you through this process and to help you protect your guarantee. That's what I do. That's my charge.
I mean, protecting the guarantee, that sounds kind of important. You can't really have it both ways. Like, hey, get this, close it. We need it closed, but also I better have a guarantee.
Listen, I understand lenders are in the business of lending money and there is risk. All we can do is manage the risk. So I never stand in the shoes of the lender and say, you need to do this. I advise them of options and say, we can do this. This is the risk. And this is the upside, this is the downside. And then you'll make the call. Like I don't make those decisions, but I think that it would be foolhardy of me not to advise you of something that could potentially harm you.
Right. Well, that's the right way to do it, right? Like, you advise them, they make the decision. But what if they make the wrong decision? Is that anything on you?
Not if I haven't given them the right advice. I mean, I can tell you do X, and if you do Y, and Y turns out to be wrong, you can't come to me and say, well, I did Y. I say, well, yeah, but I told you to do X.
And most lenders aren't going to, I would say no lender is going to make a decision that knowingly puts their guarantee in jeopardy, I would assume.
Well, no, nobody does that. I mean, we all strive, or our clients strive to be prudent lenders. I mean, that is the standard by
That's
which
the name of the game.
That is by the standard by we all operate. But as you mentioned, there are all sorts of pressures that are brought to bear: pricing, competition, and you know that as well as I do. It's hard, and there's a lot of competition. The more the agency solicits lenders to join the program, the more competition there is. So it's inevitable. But anyway, back to my original point. I don't like to think of myself as a vendor, because I think that diminishes the value of what I bring to the table. And I have not devoted my entire life to just be somebody who just fills out forms.
Right. So since you work with a lot of different lenders, can you kind of explain what, in terms of the closing process, what do you see sometimes where lenders are getting it wrong? Like, so we can kind of share and with everyone else. I'm going to ask you the same thing about what they're getting right as well.
I'm going to answer the question this way. In this industry, there are always two sides. There are the compliance folks, and then there's the production folks. And those two sides always compete, because the production side wants to close as many loans as possible. The compliance folks, they want to close as many compliant loans as possible. So there is always this competition. Mm-hmm. So I need to sometimes be an arbiter. I'm in the middle, right? So I need to, while I understand production, because that's what makes the bank profitable and be able to lend money, but you also have to be compliant. So, and I've had clients that they seesaw between those two. They're very eager in the compliance, and then something unfortunate happens. They get a repair or a denial or something like that, mm-hmm. and then they become strictly very very compliance driven, and I think you just have to roll with the punches. I mean, I've represented from the largest national banks to the smallest community banks and credit unions. and their processes are vastly different. But in the end, they all want the same thing. They all want their guarantee protected.
Sticking with the closing process, like what are the lenders that have it kind of figured out? What are they doing right?
As I mentioned, I've represented lenders that have vastly different operations. There's some lenders that have very sophisticated back office, or where they have a very strong underwriting team and closing departments, and they do all the due diligence review and all that. And then there are others that don't have that, where we have to do a lot of the review for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't think that it's a fair question to ask which ones. I can tell you that size doesn't matter. You can have a very small bank that does it great, and you can have a large bank that does it great, and you can have the opposite of that.
Well, how do you define great in the closing process? Are we talking about speed? Are we talking about communication? Are we talking about compliance? Like, let's make sure we're talking about the same thing. Because I didn't say it specifically, but I'm thinking of like the borrower's experience, because it's hard. Closing an SBA loan is hard. So in terms of like borrower experience, like, are there any keys to success there?
So again, and I keep going back to my early days in doing this, because that's where the foundation was laid, right? And whenever back in the day I closed a loan, they were done in person. And there was always a bank officer there. And as you know, I don't need to tell you, but closing an SBA loan is painful for a borrower. It's a very tedious, long process. And the closing is the only happy moment. It's when they're going to get their money. It's when they're going to get their dream to start their business. And it comes at a great price. Some of these folks, they have to mortgage their house, and they have to explain it to their wives. You don't know how many situations I've been in closings where the husband and the wife show up, and the wife says, I have to sign a mortgage to what? On my house? And, you have to explain it to them what it is, what is happening, So you that's sort of that counselor kind of, again, I represent the bank. I don't represent the borrower. But to your point, there is value to the institution that I represent to have a very happy borrower. I want a happy borrower. I don't want an unhappy borrower.
Well, there's one thing. If your spouse is showing up to the closing and that's when he or she is finding out about signing for the second lien on the house or whatever, that's not good.
That's not good. And sometimes, that's happened because the borrower doesn't want to share that information.
Right. Has it blown up a deal?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's happened
at closing?
At closing, where the wife's like, I'm not signing.
How many deals have you seen blow up at the closing table? Like 5 or 10?
Not many. Maybe between 10 and 20 sometimes. Oof. And sometimes blow up is a big word. But I have definitely been in situations that are uncomfortable situations where the parties have not come to an agreement. And this is all about parties. For example, when you're having an asset purchase or a change of ownership, as we call it, those are complicated deals. Because the lender really, in reality, is just kind of like a third party who is financing the deal. It's not our deal.
Right.
We
get into that kind of trap of like, we're like running the transaction as the lender when that's really not our role.
Correct. And I fight that. I always advise borrowers to get counsel, because the closing of the loan and the funding of the loan is just, like I said, one part of a very large, complex set of facts, right? Change of ownership. That's complicated. I've had changes of ownership blow up because they didn't work out the work in progress until they're at the table, or ARs, or accounts payable, or what's happening to the employees, or what's happening to, and then you have these competing interests, right? You have the seller who is eager to sell and wants to get out. The buyer may be a little bit reluctant, or you have the opposite. You may have a seller who has cold feet because they now can sell it to somebody else for more, and you have a borrower who's eager to close no matter what because he knows that it's a good price or thinks it's a good price. And anyway, it can get, I've closed hundreds and hundreds, thousands of deals, and it can get really, really nasty, particularly these changes of ownership where the parties don't have a clear understanding of what's happening.
Right. Yeah. And the emotions are high because you're making the biggest purchase of your life. And if you're the seller, you're selling maybe your baby that you built up over the last 20, 30 years. Wow. I spoke to a spouse of a borrower last night, in fact, because they have to sign the PFS. And they're like, what does this mean? I'm not part of this. I'm not part of the loan. So you have to kind of talk to them. But the risks are real, and people should understand that. And the spouse should sign the commitment letter on a line that says limited guarantor if the house is being pledged, so that that they know and agree to it up front. I think we did that at one point with one of the shops I worked at, where it's like, oh, we got to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yes, and beyond that, for example, you have to explain, and I've done this in the past. You have to explain what it is that you're mortgaging your house, and you have to explain sometimes, that there are potential servicing actions that can take place to substitute collateral, to release collateral, depending on how the loan is performing. So you get into all these things that really the salespeople don't really necessarily, and I'm assuming, don't get into. Like, we're going to place a lien on your mortgage, and they say, well, kind of, this is a 25-year loan. Am I going to have to live in the same house? I've asked it. I'm telling you questions that have been asked of me at a closing. Do you mean that I cannot sell this house for 25 years? Of what if I need to refinance because the interest rate goes? I said, wait. We're just placing a lien on the house. There are servicing actions that are possible. It is not expected that you're going to be in the same house for 25 years. We know that people move. I used to say this a lot, maybe not so much anymore, but people in Florida used to move every 5 years. That was kind of the standing norm. People would flip houses and move. And these borrowers just were really concerned that they couldn't do that. So it's all a matter of information. I think that if you provide the borrowers enough information, and I think the most important piece of information is get counsel. People don't understand the value of having counsel. They think that because they are paying the bank, because they're reimbursing the bank for lender fees, that I am there to protect their interest, and that's just not the case.
Well, not only that, but I get it a lot, especially in California and also in Florida, actually, where in Florida there will be a closing attorney handling a transaction, and in California it's just escrow. But in Florida, a lot of times the borrowers will just be like, why do I need an attorney? Like, what am I getting them for? I mean, I require it on any sort of change of ownership transaction, but they're like, well, you have the bank attorneys there. There's the closing attorney's going to do some of the paperwork, and they're like, why do I need an attorney for myself? What do they need to do? They think of it kind of like as what paperwork are they going to prepare? But why? So that we can really, I'd like to have a better answer for them. Like, why should they get an attorney?
Because this is a legal process. People don't understand it. We misunderstand the complexities of running a corporation. What are corporate formalities? Why form a corporation in the first place? Or LLC. People in Florida, for instance, they'll just go to the website, fill out a form, and they form an LLC. Mm-hmm. And then I say, well, you need an operating agreement. What is that? And they just go online and they get an operating agreement without understanding what all that means. This is the practice of law. In many states, to draft a deed, to draft a mortgage, you have to be a lawyer. This is a legal process. To form a corporation, that is a legal process, right? There are corporate formalities. When I started practicing law, and I sound like an old man, which I am, but you would go to your lawyer to form a corporation to help you draft articles of incorporation. And those articles of incorporation were tailored to what you wanted to do. And then after the corporation was formed, you had an organizational meeting, you had the first meeting of the shareholders, you elected your first directors, your directors elected their first officers, all the resolutions were adopted, opening a bank account, getting a seal, getting certificates. And you would have a corporate kit that, where the shares would be. And until you have litigated a case between two minority shareholders who are fighting as to the ownership of a stock certificate, you don't understand the importance of that piece of paper. Most people completely misunderstand or do not grasp the legal ramifications of a shareholder. They don't. Or a membership unit owner. They don't. They just think, okay, well, it's this entity.
Go to Sunbiz.
Go to Sunbiz and figure it out. It is a legal undertaking. And if you ever get into trouble, it becomes very much a legal process.
Sure. Well, that's when the crap hits the fan, as we say. And yeah, I'm with you, man. I want to ask you a couple questions, and we're going to, well, these are complicated. So I was going to say speed round because we're running short on time, but these are not quick answer type of questions. But they're interesting questions, and I wrote them specifically for you. So I was talking to a lender the other day, and they were talking about hiring a documentation specialist so that they can bring closing in-house. And I personally was like, why would you do that? You know, one, the borrower pays the attorney bill. You get an outside perspective when you engage outside counsel. You can leverage, you know, decades of legal experience. And I think it's a way to sort of mitigate risk in a way, because if you mess up, I can sue you, right? No, I'm just kidding. But I know you're biased, but what's your view on that? Bringing closing in-house versus external.
I mean, I have clients that do that. It depends on your operations. And for the longest time, that was not a good business model, because those fees, you have to absorb those fees as a bank. The SBA now allows to pass some of that through. So that's not quite the same. I think there is value in having outside counsel, not that I'm biased. I think that, you know, as you correctly point out, we bring a different perspective. And inevitably, whenever those institutions get into a pickle, they hire outside counsel. A good number of banks who have substantial in-house counsel resources still hire outside counsel for their regulatory issues or highly complicated legal matters. Now, you're going to say to me, well, closing an SBA loan might not be a highly complicated legal matter, and I may disagree with you.
Well, and also, you know, within an organization, you sometimes get this, I don't know if you call it groupthink, but like everyone starts thinking the same, and it's almost like, yeah, no, we can do that. And I don't know, I just value the outside. You know, if it was me, I would just go outside counsel all day long. But the other question I wanted to ask you is, all right, so this is a tough one. Okay. So all my lender friends, they tell me that the SBA tries to avoid paying the guarantee. That's just what they say. Like they'll find any way to try to get out of paying the guarantee. Now, the SBA comes to the conferences and says, this isn't a gotcha thing. And we honor, I think the number's like 97% of guarantees or something, like high. So where's the disconnect coming from, do you think?
I don't know of any such disconnect, but I can tell you that in my experience, I mean, I know of very few of our clients whose guarantee is denied. I'm not saying that it doesn't happen. Even when that occurs, I mean, we have been successful in arguing back with the agency. As you know, when there's a denial, you know, it has to go to headquarters. So sometimes we prevail. Sometimes, you know, it's a matter that, you know, there was something that was unavoidable, let's say. But I'm telling you, I've been doing this for over 25 years, I believe. There are very few cases where I've heard, oh my God, we just don't get our guarantees paid. I don't know where that's coming from.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's just a fallacy, but I mean, do you like doing that though? When there's a default, not that you would like it, but like, because that's like more of an interesting part of law where you're back into the arguments and making the case.
Well, I mean, obviously it's interesting because you have to really get into the weeds as to why something was done. And yes, that is fascinating to me as a lawyer to understand why a decision was made the way that it was made. You know, there are things that are sort of beyond our control sometimes. You know, you have intervening liens, for example, and you're in the wrong lien position. It's not because something that we did. Sometimes the borrower does it. You know, they close on a house. You're supposed to be in a second, and meanwhile they've been talking to a different bank and they get a HELOC, and before you are able to record your second mortgage, there is this other bank that now has a HELOC ahead of you. You know, it happens. Risk is unavoidable. All you can do is manage it.
I think that's a great place to end it. That's beautiful.
There you go.
Bravo.
And you didn't even have to ask me about my wife.
Thank you, Victor.
All right, that's it for this week. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode of the Art of SBA Lending. And if you have any feedback or suggestions, email me at ray@artofsba.com. Until next time, ta-ta.